As EA work on UFC 4, we at Steep Tapped thought it best to discuss what features we think EA should implement in the new game. The presentation of the EA UFC games has largely stayed the same since UFC 1. Whilst other games have evolved, for example in Madden NFL, the entire stadium is shown and aerial shots of the city and stadium are shown before the game begins. In games like NBA 2K, the players are greeted to a pre-game show with real-life personalities. In FIFA, the crowd seems ultra-realistic. In UFC 4, before starting a fight, the players could be greeted to an actual pre-fight show styled after the ESPN show that actually happens in real life. Before fights, Joe Rogan and John Anik could be talking on the sidelines about the fights before the fighters go to walk out. Nice aerial shots of Las Vegas could be shown if the fight takes place in the T-Mobile Arena, or whichever city the fight happens in. These are all things that could make the UFC 4 presentation incredible and just set it one notch above the rest. The commentary is also something fans of the series have been critical of. In UFC 4, John Anik delivered an incredible performance, but Joe Rogan rarely ever talked and seemed monotone, so UFC 4 should really have better commentary. The UFC could also offer the ability to switch between commentary teams, so if you're fighting in a European stadium, John Gooden and Dan Hardy commentate. If it's a fight in Madison Square Garden or the T-Mobile Arena, Rogan and Anik call the fights. One of the heavily marketed aspects of UFC 3 was its career mode. The career mode was a huge improvement over previous iterations, but still failed to fully immerse the player in the story and the experience of becoming an Octagon legend. Some popular EA Sports franchises, such as Madden NFL and FIFA, have implemented a journey mode which tells an actual story through in-game cutscenes and dialogue options. UFC 4 should try to include a journey-style story mode. The story mode could be a Rocky-esque story, featuring the experiences of training at an early age, getting involved in street fights and gang crime, and perhaps fighting on the regional scene as an amateur, all the way up to rising to UFC stardom and gaining the GOAT status. The Frostbite 3 engine allows game developers to get better performance from video game consoles, which means that they can build bigger and better things within their games. If EA decided to ditch their current game engine and use the Frostbite engine for EA UFC 4, they could likely make the graphics better. They could also offer 4K support for the Xbox One X and PlayStation 4 Pro consoles. It's also more of a possibility that they can create more animations. It can even open the door to PC and Nintendo Switch ports, if EA would just be willing to release the game on said console. The career mode in EA UFC 3 was a monumental shift compared to UFC 2's, but it wasn't perfect in any way. In THQ's game, they had actual real-life gyms and coaches, such as American Kickboxing Academy, 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu's, and others that made the game way more immersive. UFC 4 should contain real-life gyms and coaches, so that when you're playing career mode, the real-life coaches like Eddie Bravo, Uriah Faber, and John Kavanagh are in the actual corner offering instructions to your created fighter. They could even add real-life managers into career mode. In career modes, the player may even choose to take performance-enhancing drugs which will improve their attributes and fighters' overall skill rating. But this runs the risk of failing drug tests, which means your fighter will be sidelined and their career length will be shortened. Taking inspiration from the New Star Soccer mobile game, the player could even be able to buy items such as houses, expensive cars, and all of this will improve their morale. If their morale is high, they will perform better at training. Whilst UFC 3 vastly improved the stand-up game, it retained the same old grappling system from UFC 2, albeit it did add a few extra layers of polish, such as the ability to get takedowns up against the fence. In UFC 4, the ground game could be completely rebuilt from the ground up. The player could move their character around on the ground using the left analog stick, and transition using the right analog stick. Certain variables like stamina, position, and where the character's weight is will determine how fast you can transition between different positions. Players could also be able to block transitions like they could by using the right trigger and correct direction with the right stick in UFC 3. This would make the ground game just as fluid and dynamic as the striking system is. A HUD could also display a grade for each transition and offer advice if the player is unsuccessfully blocking a transition. Players should also be offered the option in the settings menu to use the current version of submissions, where you attempt to escape the speed gates, or they can choose to use the old submission system found in WWE games. In this totally hypothetical game mode, the player could play through the career of a coach, something akin to the manager career in FIFA. They would be tasked with making sure their fighter is properly trained for their opponent, and when a fight is happening, the player will have to press certain buttons to offer instructions on how their fighter is going to win. So if you're fighting against a wrestler like Khabib and your fighter is a kickboxer, you could encourage them to use their jab and not kick or clinch. Whenever the player controls their coach, they view the fight from the first person perspective of the coach in the fighter's corner. EA could even open up this mode to use virtual reality headsets like the PlayStation VR. Pride mode was included in THQ's UFC Undisputed 3, and it was arguably one of the greatest things in video game history. It was beautiful to experience the majesty of Japanese mixed martial arts in a video game format. Pride mode has been the most avidly requested feature from fans for EA to add in their UFC games. Essentially, it would allow you to fight in a ring and complete with the modified Pride rule set, where knees and elbows to grounded opponents are allowed, and the gameplay would be presented exactly as Pride was in all its Japanese MMA glory. This would be quite easy to do, as the UFC actually own all the Pride licenses, so it's just a matter of EA going out and implementing it in the actual game.